Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Youth Leaders Network at Integrity Initiatives International and the Asia Pacific Democracy Incubator, it is our pleasure to welcome you to our first regional webinar of the year, Empowering Youth Against Corruption, the Asia Regional Webinar. My name is Marjeela Basij-Rasikh, and I serve as the coordinator of the Youth Leaders Network, a global initiative that connects and equips young changemakers to advocate for accountability, integrity, and the establishment of an international anti-corruption court. YLN organizes a cross-regional webinar bi-monthly meetings and workshops, and recently launched IACC university chapters to support student-led anti-corruption efforts. We are excited to be joined by our partner at Asia Pacific Democracy Incubator, also known as APDI. It's a nonprofit dedicated to fostering democratic prosperity in Asia Pacific by connecting students with academic and political experts and building a platform for youth engagement across borders. Its students' leadership spans top institutions across the US, Japan, and Korea. Now, I am pleased to introduce my co-moderator, Sean Lee, who is the co-founder of APDI. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Marjeela. So my name is Sean Lee, and I study political science and philosophy at Boston University. And my work centers around political economy, global development, and AI governance. Through Asia Pacific Democracy Incubator, we strive to enable youth, led democratic cooperations and knowledge exchange across Asia Pacific region. We are honored to host today's session and welcome our esteemed guest. So we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Laode Syarif as our featured speaker. Dr. Syarif is a senior lecturer at Hasanuddin University, a law school, and a former executive director of the Partnership for Governance Reform in Indonesia, and a former commissioner of Indonesia's Corruption Eradication Commission, also known as KPK. A leading anti-corruption and environmental law expert, he has worked across Southeast Asia to strengthen democratic institutions and advance legislative reform. Dr. Syarif holds a PhD in environmental law from the University of Sydney and has advised government, civil society, and international institutions on governance and accountability. Dr. Syarif, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction. Thank you, Marjeela, and thank you all for initiating this important meeting. And yes, today I think it is very, very important to look at the importance of the role of youth in combating corruptions, especially strengthening democratic integrity and combating corruption in Asia. I will have like about 20 minutes to talk on my slide, and feel free to ask or to interrupt me if you actually guys want to ask a burning question in your head, for example. Yes, I think it is important to keep on actually think about it, that actually corruption is not something new. According to Kautilya, maybe Marjeela are actually familiar with Kautilya, said in actually 350 before Christ, it is impossible for one dealing with the government funds not to taste at least a little bit of the king wealth. Unfortunately, the current government keep on repeating it, not only testing little bit, but sometimes big chunk of it. And our first vice president, and Muhammad Hatta, it is already remind the Indonesian governments and the Indonesian people say that do not let corruption to become part of the Indonesian cultures. He said that in 1961, and I don't think that actually corruption only actually happening in Indonesia. So if you actually look at the global corruption barometers in Asia, this is actually a survey conducted in 2020. The finding was say that, I mean, across Asia, say that government corruption is a big problem. And corruption is stagnating or on the rise. Number 4, it said that bribery and use of personal connection are regular occurrence. And political integrity is lacking, especially around election, and many others. You can actually read them in Global Corruption Barometers 2020. This is actually 5 years old survey, but I think still apply until today. And still in the same survey on the government corruption, the Indonesian respondents thinks that the percentage of people who think that corruption is in the government is big problems, more than 90%. In Taiwan, the same, it is 90%. In Maldives, 90%. In India, 89%, etc., etc. You can actually look at. So corruptions, including in Japan, for example, are still actually high. So the corruption, it is not only the problem of Indonesia or the developing country, but also problem even industrial country. And if you're actually looking at the location of improper payments 2011 up to 2020 on U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, you can actually see China, Brazil, Mexico, India, Russia, Indonesia, and many others, of course. This actually is not represent the real, what you call it, the real corruption risk, but at least we can find those, the violation of U.S. foreign corrupt practices in Asia, for example. And the next, if you actually look at the current corruption perception index in 2024, if you look at an Asia and Pacific, the average is 44. So meaning, if you look at the map, most of them actually in red, including Indonesia, for example. So across Asia and the Pacific, still very high risk of corruptions. And even in the global corruption barometers in 2020, even actually sextortion rate, even Indonesia, it is actually, they put it very high, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Malaysia. So which is actually, I was actually saddened look at this number, because I thought the Indonesian people, Sri Lankan, Thailand, Malaysia are known for their politeness, but yeah, you see, I mean, still a lot of corrupt, they even actually use sex as a bribe. What is the bad impact of corruptions? If you look at actually the bad effect of corruption, for example, the infrastructures actually are easily actually broken. If you, I saw you one bridge actually collapsed in Indonesia only 3 months after the construction, and the mayors or the head of the district of this particular region in Indonesia actually went to jail. because of corruption. And also the collapse environmentals, the environment is actually destroyed because the mining company, they do not actually follow regulation because they always actually thinks they can always actually bribe the authority so that they will not actually enforce the law. Those actually just two examples, but I can give you a lot of examples if you want. And this is actually very, very important. If you look at, this is quite old survey, but I think if we do the same things, this is the World Bank, for example, Indonesia Rising Divide, December 2015. So inequality, for example, the most rich people, 1% of Indonesia, the richest people in Indonesia for 1%, it is controlled 50.3% of the Indonesian economy. But Thailand, even higher. Russia, they even actually the richest, actually they control 66.2% of Russian economy. So maybe Lee can actually share, for example, how about South Korea, for example. In China, if based on the World Bank, the half, I mean, the most rich people, 1%, they can control even 38. So I don't know, the Silicon Valleys, like Bill Gates and many other, how much in US? I mean, those top 1% people, how much money actually they control. This is also related to corruption. Again, I will say that corruption is not only the problem of developing country or poor country, but also the problem of even a well-developed country. As you just say, what is actually high-risk sectors in corruptions? And Marjeela gave me this, like public procurements, political financing, and licensing processing. For example, I just add one, and many others. But I just want to give you some examples of public procurement, for example. This is actually the example of public procurement corruption in Indonesia. For example, military procurements, state-owned companies procurements, emergency situation procurement, even like a COVID. This is actually so this is of military officers named suspect in alleged bribe of Basarnas. Basarnas is actually national emergency system for actually the procurement of helicopter, I think. Defense Ministry need a vision for military procurements. They are ready, including the Indonesian air carrier, Garuda. When I was in KPK, I was one that prosecuted them, the direct executive directors, which is actually related to Rolls-Royce. So meaning that's and this is Rolls-Royce case involving Thailand, Indonesia, and many other countries, including United States. So this is, so if you actually say, no, you need to write a thesis, a doctorate thesis on it, this is very, very important one if you actually look at, because the tentacle of Rolls-Royce actually reach many parts of the world. What is and of course political corruptions like I just want to give you that. This is Indonesian case. If you look at in the Indonesian political parties, yeah, all of them actually member of political party. There are some of them ministers, some of them member of parliaments, even a police officers and high-ranking government official, even the speaker of the parliament, for example. Those are only a few, not a few, a lot of examples. And they are actually the top leader of political party, but they are corrupt. So when I was in the KPK, for example, I think I detained like 5 out of, including the Speaker of the Parliament of Indonesia, like Setia Novanto, and we sent him to jail for we actually prosecuted him for 20 years, and the court actually said 15 years. So this is the new generations. They become actually mayor, governors. They are equally corrupt too. So actually, this is not only so corruption. It is not only a problem for like old people, but also new coming generations. So political corruption, it is actually very, very dangerous actually. Another one, it is actually licensing processing. Licensing processing, it is one of the most corrupt in Indonesia, apart from procurements and actually and what you call it, political corruption. This is a government official minister who actually went to jail. They've been to jail. They are convicted because they actually gave illegal licensing for big plantation, including, for example, and mining, etc. So those are actually parliamentarian, minister, head of oil and gas agency actually are convicted of because actually related to the licensing processes. Those actually private sector who actually bribe those big officials. They are very, very rich people, actually the 1% kind of people. Fortunately, we can actually prosecute them and they're actually in jail. If you want, for example, want to read more about like a forest-related corruption, you can actually read that. And I also published these ones. And the new one, actually just publish it as a part of like International Anti-Corruption Court. So I contribute one chapter, Political Corruption and Natural Resources Management in Indonesia. So if you're interested, feel free to read. So bribery and extraction and construction, it is actually very dominant sectors in Indonesia, for example. What we can actually do with that? For example, in procurements, Indonesian government actually trying to simplify, for example, which public service mode, if you need actually apply for simple licensing, you can just go. I think I better just continue. I'm aware of the limit of the time. For example, public service mode for planning and budgeting. It is actually important for there are some local governments to make this one-stop services. So if you want, they even actually make it in shopping mall. They have so very transparent and you can and also online application, for example. So this is make it easier. So there is no need actually to meet peoples. So you can actually doing it online, or you can just go one-stop services. Because in the past, you have to go many offices. If you need like one particular license, you have to go through 3 offices, for example. And every office, they actually ask for bribe. For it is make it actually difficult. So we created that. The second, for example, this is for licensing system. Indonesian government actually trying to establish called online single submissions on e-procurement and also e-catalogs. This is actually good in theory, but in reality, if you actually have a corrupt mind, you can always bypass the system. This is the problem, especially if you are actually in power, for example. The next, we also need to establish, for example, one map Indonesia. So our natural resources are actually portrayed in the Indonesian map. So if you want to give a license, for example, you can actually see it on the map. This is making it also more transparent. But then again, and I say, is it actually good on paper, on the system? But if you want to take a bribe, then you can actually ask Marjeela to apply, and I say yes to your application. And of course, outside the system, you can always actually give me like a bribe, and the transaction usually take place outside Indonesia, if actually a big company or big corporations. This is actually very important because it is not many a country that actually have mandatory beneficial ownership registration. So when I was in commissioner in the KPK, as you can actually see on the pictures, the Ministry of Law and Human Rights, the Ministry of Land Registration, the Ministry of Finance was actually signing this. So I think this is very important. So you can actually check one particular company, for example, who is the beneficial ownership of that particular company in the registry. And in Indonesian case, you can actually Google it. I mean, you can just go to the Ministry of Law website and you can actually check. But another one, for especially for young generation, fighting corruption is actually some kind of dangerous job. For example, as you can actually see, one of my prosecutors, when I was senior prosecutors, when I was in the KPK commissioners, suspicious activity before acid attack, and actually it was the police officer who actually attacks senior investigator of KPK. My house and Agus' house are actually attacked with Molotov cocktails in the middle of the night. Fortunately, one bottle is not explode. So yeah, here I am now. I can actually still talk. Otherwise, maybe if actually the another bottle actually explode, maybe the whole house could actually will be on fires. What is actually the legislative tool? I think this is another important aspect. So, for example, when the KPK success factor was in the past, it was established with strong legal foundations. And it is actually stated in that law, the KPK, it is actually independent from the executive, legislative, and judiciary. And it is responsible to the public. Meaning, but we, of course, we are responsible to the parliament, but it is stated here responsible to the public. Financially, we are audited by the Indonesian Supreme Audit Board and led by 5 commissioners, collective collegial. That they're all KPK law. But unfortunately, I think because many politicians, they don't like us, so they just changed the law in 2019. So the KPK now, it is not independent anymore. It is now become a part of the executive. So it is less independent compared to the original law of the KPK, of the KPK. So yeah, here it is, for example, some cases that actually are the misuse of budget, money laundering, as you can actually see, bribery, it is actually the highest, especially bribery on procurements and extortions and obstruction of justice even. So those are, and involving private sectors, legislatures, mayor, minister, we even actually prosecuted 41 ministers. 31 judges, including Supreme Court judges, justices, and even the Chief Justice of Indonesian Constitutional Court. 30 governors, but that's the old story. The old story. The current KPK law actually been changed, and I think it is create a new, some kind of like a problem. So if we want to establish a legal foundation for anti-corruption, Marjeela and Sang-Hyong. It is important that all crimes defined under United Nations Convention Against Corruption, it is actually need to be domesticated. Unfortunately, the Indonesian current laws are not yet criminalizing private sector corruptions. So if actually corruption conducted by private sectors or bribing private sector, bribing another private sector, it is not actually a crime yet in Indonesia. In Singapore, for example, in Malaysia, it is already criminalized. A bribe of foreign public official, not yet become part of the Indonesian law. Illicit enrichment and unexplained wealth, not yet a part of the current Indonesian anti-corruption law. And we do not have yet asset recovery law. It's been, the draft is already in the parliament for more than almost 10 years, but, I think there is no genuine willingness of the parliaments and the Indonesian government to pass this law, because this will create a problem for them. What is the international cooperation? Yes, I think it is very, very important. And as Kofi Annan say, if a crime cross all borders, so must law enforcement. It is very, very important. So that's why I was part of people who actually trying to establish this international anti-corruption court, for example. Of course, it will, I don't really think in the current global situation they want to do that, but I mean, it is actually very, very important initiative. For example, under the current Indonesian international law, for example, we have extradition, transfer of sentenced person, mutual legal assistance, transfer of criminal proceeding, law enforcement agencies cooperation and joint investigation. Actually, we have it in United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And you can actually read them in chapter 4. Based on my limited experience, the most effective one actually agency-to-agency cooperation. For example, KPK with the FBI, KPK with CPIB, KPK with IACC in Hong Kong, and many others. Unfortunately, if we have actually agency-to-agency cooperation, it has to be like through mutual legal assistance if you want to use the evidence in court, because the proof you actually receive it based only on agency-to-agency cooperation, it will not actually admissible to the court. So it have got to go to mutual legal assistance. However, it is always takes time. Another one, Interpol channels. But this is also another difficulties, for example. How about the corruption itself involving the police, for example? It is make it even difficult to work with police to police, for example. Also, Egmont Group, this very good one, for example, financial intelligence unit. We are working closely with financial intelligence unit in every country just to see what's transaction, for example, and also through immigration and deportation. So that's the KPK experience. Everything that actually needs. So if you actually look at the current mode of information sharing mechanism, Ministry of Foreign Affairs through diplomatic channel, I tell you, this is not effective, because corruption usually involving high-ranking public official. So it is so difficult if you ask the Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually to do the things. And of course, letter of request through diplomatic channel takes time. Through central authority for mutual legal assistance, yeah, sometimes takes months. But the most effective one, for example, anti-corruption agency, so agency-to-agency cooperation. You can actually do it by email. You can actually even through WhatsApp. Unfortunately, you need to, I mean, if you get an evidence, you have to go through, you have MLA. If you don't have MLA, you cannot actually use it for, it's not admissible in the court of law. So this is actually very important. So I just want to give you some example. That's actually cross-border investigation of Indonesia. This is another member of parliament, for example. He not important, but I want just show you this. From Indonesia, I went to Singapore, to Vietnam, to Cambodia, and charters private jet and go to Colombia. He was actually about to change his nationality. Fortunately, our investigators already land in Colombia, so we can actually take him back. But I mean, this is very important of international cooperation. Rolls-Royce case involving many, for example, we have actually do investigation with Serious Fraud Office in Indonesia, and we are also involving the CPIB in Singapore and many others. I think I already passed my time. So, for example, in that particular case, at least we have to work. Sorry. We have to work with CPIB in Singapore, Serious Fraud Office in UK, and of course the KPK. But always actually takes time. This is another one, but I don't really think that importance. I just want to. This is very important. I have to work with many authorities in order to put this particular guy to prosecute, because he was a Speaker of Parliament. So he went to jail for 20 years and actually reduced to 15 years. But since he was actually the Speaker of Parliament, they actually make political maneuvering and they even actually change the KPK law. You see, so I was in the office, so they kill KPK under my watch. So that's, I mean, this is always actually not only legal aspect of it, but actually you have to look at the political aspect of it. It is very, very important. What more? Yeah, so multi-jurisdiction investigation. Through this case, we have to work with CPIB, the FBI. So most actually evidence for that Speaker of Parliament, I got them from FBI. I never actually dream of going to Mauritius, but because of this particular case, I went up to Mauritius actually to find evidences. But most, he even actually tried to orchestrate. He was actually, for example, faking that he's actually sick. He actually rented one floor of the hospitals, and his lawyer pre-arranged traffic accidents. This is very nice, actually. You can actually make a movie out of this particular case. This is, I have to go. I mean, this is not important, but actually only a few examples of the importance of This is very important. So multi-jurisdiction investigation challenges usually non-cooperative jurisdiction. It is very become a problem, especially if I've met a lot of difficulties actually working with Chinese authority. They never actually cooperate, even though many Indonesian corruptors actually flew to China. If you actually follow one MDB to China, until today they are still in China. Legal system of different country, civil law, common law system, and dual criminality requirements, it is actually make it difficult. The process of mutual legal assistance and diplomatic channels, sometimes it is actually takes time. Lack of resources, rapid movement of a sophisticated modus operandi, facilitated by globalization and technology. And now I can actually transfer money just like through my mobile phone to send if I want. It is very easy, but it is difficult. So, and also sometimes language barriers among law enforcement agency. But of course, this is not anymore. But this is created difficulties sometimes. So, if you look at mutual legal assistance mechanism, for example, bilaterals, multilateral, etc., etc., but it takes time, and it is ineffective to combat fast-moving corruption case. So we need to find a way. But unfortunately, we have to work with the authorities. And I don't really think that the current global climate actually will actually support us on this. For example, if you actually look at, agency to agency cooperation, it is actually very important, very fast and efficient, but it is only for intelligent purposes. You cannot use the evidence in court. Agency to agency, less bureaucratic because you work actually police to police, for example. But evidence gathers cannot be used in legal proceeding, in the court proceeding. Both speak the same law enforcement language. I hope you understand me. For example, if you're talking with the same investigators, you have the same understanding of the importance of the case. But when you actually involving like the ambassadors, it has become very difficult because they don't really understand the language of law enforcement agency. So our international legal framework, I think it is not designed to fight fast-moving corruption case. So therefore, I think there is an urgent need to introduce new legal framework to fight fast-moving crimes, especially economic crime. So, and what is actually the role of youth? I think this is very, very important because we need to create a demand side from the people. Never ever actually put your hope on the politician about corruptions, because most corrupt individuals actually they are in the government. So that's why we need to create demands, clean society. So that's why, for example, if you look at the Indonesians, why we have very strong anti-corruption agency in the past, because the youth, the students actually storming the Parliament House, ask for more accountability of the government. Unfortunately, they're actually starting doing the same things again. This is the pictures of 1998 when Suharto actually forced to resign as a president after 32 years, for example. I want to finish this, to end this presentation with the quote from a friend of mine, from Heidi Mendoza in the Philippines, say, fighting corruption is like being a mother. You have no right to stop, and giving up is not an option. And I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Syarif, for your elaborate presentation highlighting the various aspects and the tragedy behind the fact that corruption is such a global issue, and therefore why global cooperation and global effort is needed in every sector to fight grand corruption. I would like to ask a few follow-up questions highlighting different aspects of what you pointed. But first, really looking at the regional trends. You did mention some, but I would love to hear more about what are the most worrying trends you have observed when it comes to corruption across Asia, especially in democratic or semi-democratic systems.
Yes, I think political corruption, it is one of the more scary one, especially where the politician, for example, have to buy actually vote. In the case of Indonesia, a lot of politicians, they have actually to give money during general elections. In the Philippines, in Malaysia, in India, for example, I don't know where you're from, Marjeela, originally, but vote buying, it is actually common in Asia, except for Singapore, sorry, maybe Japan, or South Korea. I don't know. I don't know. So we are kind of like seen as democratic, but it is not really democracy. What we call it, we need substantive democracy, not procedural democracy. So if those people in power, because they actually bought, they actually already paid to the people, so the people are not demanding them or expecting them to be more transparent and accountable, because actually they give money. In the case of Indonesia, Thailand, and maybe in Mekong Basin river like Vietnam, Myanmar, even Myanmar, even actually, we don't need to discuss it because they do not have some kind of like very free election, for example. But that, because of rampant of political corruption, so the trade among ASEAN country, for example, or including in Asia, so it can be controlled by certain individuals, and using personal connection and bravery as a tool. So, for example, if actually Singapore or Malaysia or Indonesia want to enforce the law and asking for the help from China, for example, this will be very difficult. And those kind of things. So political corruption, it is actually, when I say political corruption, including election and many others, I mean, in the making of legislation process, those kind of things, For example, if one very rich individual want to create a law that actually serving their needs, the government can actually do it. In the case of Indonesia, if you follow the enactment of job creation law, the omnibus law, they just change all good law, for example, because they don't like it. So they lessen the standard of environmental standard. Actually, they actually reducing the human rights standard of environmental law and many other law, this kind of things. So what you call it? Those rich people behind the door, they can actually control the parliament and the government. But in the case of Indonesia, it is even actually bad because those rich people, they are also a member of parliament. They are also, some of them actually, they have ministerial posts. So even more dangerous. So I think the one and only hope actually to the youth and also to the people in general are asking for more transparency and accountability. Otherwise, we cannot just actually put our hope on them, right?
What I hear you say is also it's not necessarily the lack of law, it's also important aspect is the enforcement of the law and holding leaders across various sector accountable. And on that note, looking at the legislative tools, and curious really what legal tools or frameworks from Indonesians' experience do you believe could be useful in other countries looking to reform their anti-corruption laws, knowing how politicians and private sector still have a long way to go to really fight grand corruption, but would love to hear some of your thoughts.
Yes, I think so. If you actually look at the original KPK law, it can be used, for example, to develop independent anti-corruption agencies. And the second, however, the anti-corruption law of Indonesia, it's need to be revised because we do not yet include some crimes that I explained before. For example, the asset recovery law, we do not have it at the moment. And also private sectors corruption or bribery, it is not yet included in the law. So if, of course, Indonesia can be used as an example, but I mean, Indonesia is not perfect if you look at. The second, I think the most important one on how we are going to establish strong, independent anti-corruption agencies. If you want that, actually, we can actually, you guys or all of us can actually look at the Jakarta principles on the independency of law enforcement agencies. And when I was in the KPK, we also produce, call it Colombo commentary on Jakarta principles on the independency of anti-corruption agencies. So, I mean, you guys can actually just Google them and you can actually find them. And this has been trying to make it available by UNODC to be used as an ideal principles or ideal anti-corruption agency if we have some independency.
Thank you. You back to the KPK's success factor. You mentioned at the beginning how the fact that it was independent from different powers, whether if it was judicial, etc., that made it much more efficient. But then nowadays, using that very same law to reverse and have its own limitation, I'm curious what institutional safeguards are essential to make sure that the effectiveness of such initiative continues to persevere despite the different, efforts to make it a political tool for personal gain.
Yes, actually, even if we won't actually make it very strong legal foundation of anti-corruption agency, among us, actually, we have been discussing it, is to be, there is specific article in the Constitution, for example, saying the importance of independence anti-corruption agencies. So the parliaments and the government make it difficult to change the law. For example, in the Indonesian case, when we actually start prosecuting the Speaker of the Parliament, it's only 2 weeks. 2 weeks. They changed the good KPK law into to become part of the executive without consulting the KPK itself. So I don't really know what really happened. So the government was represented by the Ministry of Law at the moment, not involving the KPK at all. And just actually 2 weeks, they just revised the law. And they even actually said, no, the change of the law, it is actually to strengthen the KPK. So they use actually that jargon. So, of course, the students went to the street protesting it. Several students even actually got shot and passed away out of this protesting, but it was not successfully, actually, it was not successful in stopping the presidents and the parliaments. Yeah, it was a sad story. Yeah.
It just shows how the power of people working together across board, really voicing their opinion to highlight the importance of, and what you mentioned, the demand for transparency and accountability, so that governments and private sector and whatnot does have the understanding that they will be held accountable and act accordingly. So looking at the high risk sectors, right? We mentioned earlier about public procurement and political financing and how they're often cited as corruption hotspots. Would love to know what measures have been most effective in reducing vulnerabilities in these areas.
Yes, I already explained to you for procurement, for example, we established one agency, they call it LKPP, National Procurement Agency. And so all government procurements, in theory, have to go through that. So people can actually bid through online. Yeah. Unfortunately, there is also a law, like the military, the, what you call it, state-owned companies, they don't need to go through that. But actually, state-owned company, it is very, very big. It is very important. So, and also small procurements, and also during an emergency like COVID, during COVID, or for example, earthquake, because it is actually need to have, you don't need to go through that process. But that's actually quite good. It can actually reduce because it can actually cut the owners of the project and the applicants. This is one way to do it. And in Indonesia, now we are actually still working on it. And I think Mexico, they also have similar procurement agency. In US, for example, I don't know in South Korea, but in Singapore, they also have that. So it is actually, in theory, can reduce level of corruption in procurement. But as just say, it is actually depends on you and me. I mean, it is depends also on the people behind those machine. If you or because there is no, I mean, there is we do not have any tools actually to stop people to talk outside the system, right? So it can still be corrupted. But we just had a new case. It is a procurement of like a road development in North Sumatra. And the head of public works in the province of North Sumatra has been actually cut to take a bribe from developers, even though it is actually go through procurement agency. But after that, they say, okay, we've been actually give the project, you have to give us like a fees, for example. And the governors of those West North Sumatra, actually the son-in-law of previous president, President Joko Widodo. I don't know yet whether these governors actually involved or not, but still actually investigated by the king.
Mm. You mentioned the importance of international cooperation, and right, you talked about the importance of agency to agency cooperation, but it's also limitation. You talked about mutual legal assistance, Interpol channel, FIU channels, the different modes that you can use to combat corruption. However, the challenge remains about its efficiency, and especially, like you mentioned, when you work with fast-paced, fast corruption cases. So, looking at that, and also looking at the ongoing campaign to create international anti-corruption court, and I'm curious to know, how do you view the potential role of international anti-corruption court? Could it address gaps that national systems can't?
Yes, I think it can play actually a good role, because it depends on the constitution of the court itself. If we have actually like international agreement as the foundation, of course, we are going to mention the limitation of the current mode of cooperation. So that's why I think we've been actually trying to find legal avenue, for example, whether we are going to add one more section of International Criminal Court. But I think at that time we thought that this is kind of like almost impossible. I also suggested, for example, maybe we can actually use the protocol. We developed special protocol on United Nations Convention Against Corruption to create a specific protocol with kind of like less, what you call it, less condition. So it can be actually created to investigate fast-moving economic crime, including corruptions like money laundering, etc. So number three, I think one of like the main breakthrough, for example, if one particular country not cooperative, so we can actually use the power of this new court, for example, to ask for accountability, accountability for corrupt individuals, for example.
Yes, it is. It is really hopeful to see how the IACC team and the treaty committee and all involved are trying to address how to make it as efficient as possible and as effective as possible, and really learning from previous courts and other existing courts to leapfrog from all the inefficiency that has happened, to make sure that that doesn't repeat, and it's also very cost effective. I know you mentioned before I um, turn the floor to my colleague Sean. I wanted to hear more about what exactly is your message to young activists, young people, to do in their own communities to advocate for reform and hold leaders accountable beyond, going on marches and making loud noise? But what really can they get done to make sure that there is a step forward into um, having um, uh, positive impact on actually making the fight matter to eradicate corruption across different sector?
Yeah, I mean, I keep on saying to my students, and especially in Indonesia, civil society group, the government that we have, it's a reflection of our people. So I think it is important for the youth, the new generations, actually to work together. Started with anti-corruption education, for example, in their school. I remember, for example, a student, high school student in Indonesia, created a project of petty bribery in school, like a gift to the teachers. And it has become like headline of many Indonesian newspapers. They just created the small campaign as a part of their education. The seconds, and I think they can also create kind of like a community. Actually, in Indonesia, I like one community, actually women. Saya perempuan anti korupsi, can be translated. This kind of like a movement. I am a woman's anti-corruptions. I'm anti-corruption women's. So this is kind of actually good. So they're actually demanding their very, not even local government, but actually village level government, actually to be more accountable. For example, if they actually go to the hospitals and they have like a queuing, and some official actually asking for like a small change, and they even actually make a noise about it. So it is very, very important for them actually to organize themselves. And in Indonesian case, usually actually the students, university students, when I was in the KPK, I was trying to establish anti-corruption institutes within university. So the KPK actually working with them as the agent of anti-corruption. And some of them even actually reporting their president of the university, for example. But of course, the university don't like this. But you have to work with youth with many other capacities, you know. I mean, we have to be more creative. In junior high school or even in high school, I saw some project, for example, they have an expo of anti-corruption painting, for example, for students. So there are a lot, actually, if we can actually do it just as a part of the education. But at the same time, also will create, hopefully, accountability and awareness of people in power.
Thank you so much, Dr. Syarif. Definitely the grassroots movements, as important as the enforcement of the existing law and coming up with much more efficient law. And I really appreciated what the quote you shared by your colleague, the fact that, you know, fighting corruption is like being a mother. You have no right to stop, and you cannot afford to give up. And that is exactly how it's a perfect way to sum up the fight against corruption must continue. Now I'll give the floor to Sean for the continuation of Q&A session before we open up the floor to Q&A session. And I just would like to also remind the attendees to please feel free to share, use the Q&A box to submit your questions, or simply after Sean is done, raise your hand to ask your questions, and we will invite you to ask your question. Thank you. Over to you, Sean.
So for me, we, as a student myself and a someone who wants to be a future leader like yourself, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you.
I have questions on your personal life and how you got to be in that position. So my first question would be, and I'm sure most of us here are curious about this, but what experiences from your early life or education shaped your views on justice and public service?
Okay, I think I came from actually a small town in Indonesia, a small village, small island. It's actually a small island when so I do not have some kind of like a specific expose on activism, on anti-corruption activism. Until I become a student, I become one of the leader of students in my university and protesting about corruption at that time during Suharto regime, for example. And however, if you actually read my CV, my background it is actually environmental law. Environmental law. But I was wondering why we have very good environmental law, Environmental Management Act, but it is actually never enforced, never properly enforced. So since then, I just realized because of high level of corruption, so our actually Environmental Management Act cannot actually properly enforce. Since then, I become interested just to combine environmental law and the importance of good governance. So apart from teaching, I was also work in the Partnership for Governance Reforms at that time, since 2008. Since then, I become aware of lot of corrupt individuals within the Indonesian government. So we develop program assisting the law enforcement agencies, assisting the Supreme Court, assisting many others, especially after the fall of Suharto. Unfortunately, we established very good anti-corruption agency, I think, at that time. But the political structures, it's actually never changed and even actually make it difficult. So that's why in 2019, the KPK actually, they changed the KPK from independent to become part of the executive again. So meaning that we need a lot of individuals, especially the youth, I mean, to demand more transparency and more accountable government. And I think this is actually not only for Indonesia, but for including United States, for example, and many other countries. So that's actually what's make me, kind of like committed to this calling, because I don't want to see, for example, the new generation or my sons or my grandson actually still facing difficulty in the futures. And of course, I want a better environment, not only for Indonesia, but actually for, if you can actually see, if you look at the corruption perception index, I mean, the lowest 30 country or even 40 country, most of them actually very poor. Not because they do not have actually natural resources, but because of very corrupt government. If they have actually very rich, the top levels, the 10%, the 1% are very, very, very rich beyond imagination, but it is not well distributed compared to, for example, with the top 10 country that have more than 80 score. Let me say, for example, Denmark, Norwegia, Sweden, New Zealand, Singapore to some extent. Yeah, there are, I mean, poor people, it is quite difficult to fight in this country because they actually, they have a better government. So we have to fight together.
Sure, that I totally agree on your point. So moving on to our next question. Since you mentioned how you were educated both in Indonesia and in Australia, I'm sure your foreign education in Australia had shaped you immensely. Being educated from abroad and learning from a first world country. So how did your international education in Australia shape your understanding of governance and corruption?
Yes, actually it is enrich my understanding, but global perspective. And also at the same time, I remember once, I think my integrity class actually started in Brisbane. I
Oh.
have supervisors. His name, Professor Douglas Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
So one night, it was uh, the faculty actually have this natalis in Indonesian language. Actually, what is actually the anniversary of the faculty, of the law faculty. So the research students was actually invited. So I was research student. I was doing my master, but as a research student, I did my master by research. So we were research student actually invited to have like a gala dinners and stuff. So we went in suit, it's nice clothes, but only for research students. At that night, I brought a camera with me, and
Mm-hmm.
so we take a pictures. And my supervisor actually asked me to take a picture with his wife, uh, and and with Anika. Anika is a friend of mine from Sweden. So we take actually pictures. Just so I developed this is an old camera with a film. So I went to Fuji the next day, develop it, and I have like a 3 postcard size pictures.
Yeah.
My supervisor with his wife, my supervisors with the 3 of us, and
Mm-hmm.
my supervisor with just 3. Mm. So I gave it to him, and he's asked me how much is this cost, and I say, no, no, this is not important. I mean, like this is just a gift for you. Not even a gift. Just take it. And he say, no, you are my students. I cannot
Mm.
take a gift from you. So I
Oh.
assume this is actually 75 cents, I think, or 45. I forgot. So he gave me $2 for that. So I feel like, oh, this is new for me, because this is actually nothing for Asian, right? If you give something, so when after I finish my PhD, no, I think during my PhD students, so I went to Pace University, and I was invited to talk, and he was also invited to talk, and I said, Professor Fishers, actually, I still remember you actually give me money just for that pictures, and I want to buy you drink now. And I said, oh, of course you can now, because you are not my student anymore. So that's actually sit in my brain. This is kind of like something new to me, and I think this is also shape the way I interact with my students at the moment.
That makes sense. Um, so you mentioned how your expertise and your influence are linked to environmental law as well, along with your legal reform. So regarding that issue, I was curious to know how did you come to know your work at intersection of environmental law and governance, and the reason why you were interested in both?
Yes, as I just told you, because, for example, if you look at how natural resources in Indonesia extracted, most of them are actually not responsible. For example, we have a lot of mining, copper, nickel, gold, coal, you name it, we have it actually. But most mining actually operating in very low standards, even actually below the standard of the Indonesian law itself. But very rare to hear that actually they are actually prosecuted,
Sure,
or
that makes
or for example, they revoke their licenses simply because they can actually bribe. So since then, oh, you cannot just tell your students that they have to follow Environmental Management Act, Fisheries Act, or Mining Act, for example, if you are not actually fixing the governance aspect of it. So that actually make my work intermingling between the two. And until today, so for example, I wrote a few articles on the interaction between good governance, anti-corruption on natural resources management, for example.
Sure. That makes sense. Since you mentioned a lot about KPK and judicial independence, I want to focus more on the environmental corruption that Indonesia faces. Um, so I realized that how Indonesia is moving its capital from Jakarta to Nusantara in the near future. And clearly there's been a many news report that in the making of Nusantara, there has been a lot of environmental concerns such as deforestation of tropical rainforests and seen in many instances when in terms of national development phase, like what's happening in Nusantara, since it's a planned city, there's been a I'm sure there's a plenty of room for corruption in the making of Nusantara, in contracting deals and real estate, presumably. So how do you see Indonesian government tackle such complex issues on environment and corruption together? Let's say
Yes, this is,
case of Nusantara. Yeah.
thank you. This is actually a very, very important question, because when the government want to develop Nusantara, they promise that they are going to create environmental conscious kind of cities. They even actually said city within the forest
Yeah.
or forest within the city.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when actually they start the constructions, some local people has been forced to move outside. And of
Yes.
course, there were a few instances where they have to cut a forest and, of course, uh, create new environmental problems in the area. The second, the corruption aspect of it, it is actually high. I mean, the risk of corruption, because the Nusantara development, because it is considered national strategic project. So they do not need to go through the National Procurement Agency. So you see, they make exemption for themselves. Therefore, the dealing with the governments and private sectors cannot be easily controlled. So that's why I can understand the people who are actually questioning the governance aspect of the development of the new capitals in Bodø. So we do not have yet one particular case at the moment, but I don't really think with the current condition of KPK actually brave enough to investigate irregularities, because the KPK now actually is not independent anymore. And I don't think the police or the Attorney General actually willing to risk their positions, actually questioning the development of the new capitals. So I think the corruption risk, it is actually there. So that's why this is very important for the people to voice their concern, so that the government actually cannot make like illegal dealing
Sure.
with private sectors.
Yes. Thank you for tackling such recent issues in Nusantara. So my next question would be about digital governance, especially due to the rise of AI and technology. Um, but before that, as you can see in the global news, recently there's been many populist leaders seen across the world, including, let's say, like Trump or Argentina's Javier Milei. Like, how do you see Indonesia acting upon such populist leader, and how do you think technology can shape anti-corruption strategies or populist strategies um, to prevent corruption or anti-democracy in the next decade in Indonesia?
Wow, very difficult questions, yeah. But if you actually look at the previous president of Indonesia,
Mm-hmm.
he was very popular.
Mm-hmm.
His approval rate even actually more than 70% or
Mm-hmm.
about 80%. But, you know, he is the one who actually weakening the KPK. He is the one who actually changed several good law because the common people
Yeah.
actually supporting him.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the actually the dangerous aspect of popular leaders because usually they are supported by less educated people.
Yeah.
Why actually he was actually supported? Yeah, for example, he give subsidies to many direct subsidy to many local villages. Uh, he even actually give like a T-shirt wherever he goes, so people actually love him actually. So, but at the same time, he actually trying to destroy the foundation of the Indonesian democracy. For
Mm-hmm.
example, he was actually forced his son to become the candidate of the vice president, even though, even though his sons actually not yet fulfill the age limit to become a to become a candidate of the first vice president. So he asked people to challenge that law to the constitutional court, and the constitutional court say yes with the change because the constitution, the chief justice of the constitutional court actually married to the younger sister of the previous president.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the actually the dangerous aspect of populist government, and we can actually see now in United States, for example, Foreign Corrupt Act now has
Yeah.
been actually asked by Trump not to
Yeah.
enforce it. Now, I
Yeah.
mean, like so, yeah, and you can actually see it in many part of the world.
Yeah. So adding on to that, your point, you mentioned how there's a lot of corruption happening in Indonesia in terms of heritaging the political position to their sons and daughters.
Mm.
But I, as someone who is a student who follows the global news a lot, I can see that there's a common trend in global South, also known as like Southeast Asia. There's been a major corruption issue between Thailand and Cambodia, if you know. And
Yep.
there's been a case in Indonesia. I think this kind of common trend is happening throughout Southeast Asia. And I want to hear your opinion on why would that be the case. especially in Southeast Asia, aside
Yeah,
from economic issues?
yeah. For example, Indonesia, it is actually very good example of it. Now the son of the previous president become the vice president. The former son of Marcos now become a president in the Philippines,
In the Philippines, yeah.
and and the sisters of the previous president become the vice ministers, the vice presidents. And if you look at also in Thailand,
Yeah.
the sisters of the former prime ministers become a prime minister. So this is common. This is actually common. If you
Mm.
go to South Asia, for example, like in India
Mm.
or Bangladesh, maybe a bit different. But
Mhm.
in Pakistan, keep on actually rotating between those uh, uh, clan. So this
Yeah.
is, yeah. So I don't really know actually why actually happening, but
Mhm.
I think the Southeast Asian peoples and Southeast Asia peoples, they always actually see the patterns on what you in Indonesia during the reform movement, we are actually opposing of like a 3K,
Mhm.
3C, corruptions, collusions,
Mhm.
and sorry, 1N, nepotism. So
Oh,
nepotism, it is actually never properly addressed. And
sure.
nepotism, it is actually it is a part of conflict of interest, right?
Yeah.
Which is conflict of interest is a part of corruption. So this
Mhm.
is need to be addressed. Unfortunately, because of the education, the level of education of Southeast Asian in
Mhm.
general, they do not see this as a problem because they are
Mm.
actually majority. Uh, 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 so I think the average of Indonesian education actually the highest will actually lower than junior high school.
Oh,
Yeah. So in this kind of environment, it is very easy to manipulate people with vote buying, with like direct subsidy, and this kind of things.
yeah. So it would be, in summary, lack of education.
Yeah, one of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
this one of them.
Okay, so my last question for you to wrap up my time would be, so to students who are attending this conference, what mindsets and skills should young leaders cultivate to fight corruption effectively?
Number one, make yourself aware of the dangers of corruption and danger uh, 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 of corruption risk, of corrupt nepotism, uh, uh, because they are actually very, very dangerous if we want to actually to create a better society, as actually a better country. And of course, equip yourself with the information, just like yourself. For example, you read a lot, for example. You understand what really happens in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in many others, but not every student actually aware of it. Yeah,
Sure.
because they
Mhm.
are actually they like watching TikTok and many other activities, So it is very, very important to equip yourself with informations.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions answers. It was really inspiring. So we'll move on to open floor questions from the audience. And we currently have two questions from the participants. I think Dr. Syarif just answered Sarah's question about individual corruption efforts to move beyond to an individual. I think he just answered that one. And so I'll just move on to reading the question from Jose. If I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but I'll read it to you. I'm curious about the practice of trading in influence, which is prevalent in many Asian countries, especially in government tendering processes. Although it is explicitly addressed in Article 18 of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, countries like Indonesia and others lack a legal framework specifically targeting this form of corruption. Why do you think this gap exists, and what are main obstacles to addressing it in Asia? Lastly, how do anti-corruption agencies in Asia perceive and address trading in influence crimes within their broader legal frameworks?
Yes, thank you for reminding me that. I think I forgot to put it in one of the gap of the Indonesian law to United Nations Convention Against Corruption is actually trading in influence. So it is not yet in Indonesian law. Of course, according to UNCAC, this is not mandatory. However, this is very, very important because corruption can actually happen because of like trading in influence. If you are a mayor, or if you are governors, you can always actually influence someone to give you money, to give you project, etc. So that's why actually it's very important to be part of the regime of anti-corruption law, not only in Indonesia, but in many other countries. How we are going to put it into the law to include some aspect of like trading in influence, illicit enrichment, unexplained wealth into the law. I don't really think if we can only actually hope for our politician actually to put it in the law because of their genuine or willingness. I don't really think they're going to do it. So I think we have to demand it. Actually, the people, the students, the mass need to force the government and the parliament to put the law itself in, to put those very important provisions into law. I think there is now one possible avenue because the Indonesian want to be part of OECD, and OECD actually required, for example, bribery within corporate or private sector. It is actually has to be prohibited, for example. So if Indonesia want to be part of the OECD, they have to revise the current anti-corruption law. I don't know in other country, but I think it is the demands of the people actually to make the parliament and the government move for better legislation. Actually, I also want to answer the question actually how we are going to prevent a corruption beyond punishment of individuals. In my limited capacity or my limited experience, it is important to have the balance of prosecution and prevention. And the prevention, actually, it is very, very important to give, for example, an understanding, creating some kind of like a specific tools to reduce the possibility of corruption. For example, national procurement systems. Even though it will not actually reduce 100%, but it will reduce at least 50% of corruption. Petty corruption, for example, road-related action. For example, in the past and still in Indonesia, if you cross a red light, you have to pay directly to the police, for example. Now, there is, for example, a traffic, what you call them, a traffic camera and stuff. So actually, they just focus on the plate number of your vehicles and you have to pay to the bank, for example. Those kind of improvement can actually reduce corruption. So technology actually can be used to reduce technical corruptions. You know what I mean? Technical means petty corruption, actually small exchange, for example. But lastly, but this is actually very difficult to do, we have to address corruption within political party. This is very, very difficult to do because, for example, big corporations, they are always the one who give the highest contributions to political party. In US, for example, we know how much money Google give to Democratic or to Republican, for example, because they have like a registry. In Indonesia, even though we have the law and we have the limit of maximum contribution of individual or corporation, but usually they just give them through many other channels. And this is actually one of the main factors why in the global south it is very, very difficult to eradicate corruptions because the structures of our political parties and governments is still very corrupt. And it is very difficult to do.
Yeah, I think that explains a lot of questions that we asked before. So if we don't have further questions, I'll pass it on to Marjeela for closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I still will invite folks, if they have any other further questions, to raise their hands or use the Q&A box. But I do have one follow-up question, and that is both the protection of whistleblowers. How can we strengthen it in countries with weak rule of law? That's one aspect of my question. And my other question is that how do we also, what can be done to insulate anti-corruption commissions and agencies from political interference? What are some of your thoughts on those two questions?
Yes, at the moment we have two laws in Indonesia on protection of whistleblowers. One is actually the protection of informants, witness, and victims. Under this law, you can actually ask for protection of, in Indonesia, we call it LPSK, which is actually stand for informant witness protection, for example. Number two, in the KPK law, there is one particular article for the protection of whistleblowers. Even actually, we can actually give them some kind of incentive. So we use through electronic channel if they are actually afraid, they can actually use that. If you actually open up the website of Corruption Eradication Commission, the KPK, you can actually see the channel through email, through WhatsApp, and through many other means of communication. I remember when I was commissioner, we never actually put our witness or our informant under the protection that particular agency have. Because in that protection agency, actually most officer in that actually from the Indonesian police. So we built our safe house. So we keep actually moving it. We contracting. I mean, the KPK contracting like a house or an apartments. There is no sign on it, just to put our whistleblowers because it is very dangerous. However, sometimes people, they just use the KPK. For example, they are reporting someone, and after they are reporting it, of course, the KPK give them some kind of like letter that we already received your report in this particular day. And after that, they went out the office and they talked to the journalists, and so, okay, I already reported the governor of North Sumatra because of his corruption allegation. If they actually open up like that because for asking for kind of like a political pressure, then we actually stop protecting them because they are actually, what you call it, they disclose their individuals, their identity by themselves, for example. So, but this is very, very important to have a good law to protect the witness, the informants, and the victims. What your other questions? I forgot.
My other question was regarding what can be done to insulate anti-corruption commissions and anti-corruption agencies and efforts
Yes.
political interference.
Yeah. In KPK, I mean, original KPK law, the commissioners of the KPK was actually elected by the team of selection committee that consisted of what you call it, individual that actually trusted by the people. So the selection committee, it has to be clean. The second, people with problems must actually, they have to avoid people with like criminal record or has been seen, actually has been compromised their integrity in the past, for example. Because at the end of the day, the commissioners of anti-corruption agency, they need an approval from the parliament. In my case, for example, not in my case, after us, when the commissioner was elected, was my former deputy at that time. And this former deputy, we've been actually accused of ethic violation. We even actually processing it for ethic violation for meeting potential suspect. So we give the record to the selection committee, to the presidents, and to the parliament. But they still actually electing him as chief commissioner. What happened after he became a commissioner, he actually accused of taking bribe from the accused, which was the Minister of Agriculture. So he was actually forced to resign, and there was 3 commissioners of Corruption Education Commission of the KPK was actually violating the code of ethics of the KPK. Can you imagine from very trusted government institution, and the 3 commissioners actually involved in corruption. So it is very, very important. The people, again, we have to trust the people. The people must demand clean individual to lead the anti-corruption agency. If they have a problem in the past, it will create a difficulty in the future.
Thank you. I see there's one more question just came in, and Sarah mentioned in many global South countries, anti-corruption laws exist on paper but fail in practice. What concrete steps can be taken to bridge the gap between legislation and real accountability? And why do you mention that it's difficult to address corruption in the global South? It touches upon a lot of many different things.
Yeah, simply because if you want to eradicate corruption, you need strong willingness of the highest authority of the country. If you do not have that, never dream of like prosecuting the minister, prosecuting like high-ranking police officers, or prosecuting the president of political party. So that's why I'm saying kind of like pessimistic. Because, for example, we have MACC in Malaysia, we have CPIB in Singapore, we have almost ASEAN countries, they have some kind of anti-corruption agency on paper. But not many actually prosecuting high-ranking official. Singapore, for example, last year or this year, been actually prosecuting one minister. Malaysia was prosecuting his own prime minister, but only when he actually stepped down, when Mahathir became a president, for example. In Indonesia, we prosecuting many at that time when KPK was really independent. Now, it is questionable whether they still have the ability to go for the big fish. So it is not in the law, but it is actually on genuine willingness of the highest authority. Never ever actually dream of very strong and independent anti-corruption agency if the president or the king of the prime minister actually have no genuine interest on enforcing anti-corruption.
Yeah, yeah. It just highlights the importance of cooperation, collaboration among so many sectors, and that begins also with providing quality education and that services from the very young age to understand the importance of integrity. And it begins always from education, educating the mass. Thank you so much, Dr. Syarif, for this very insightful dialogue and for your decades of leadership and service in combating corruption. Thanks also to Sean, our partner at the Asia Pacific Democracy Incubator, and to all of you with sharing your questions. We really hope that this discussion leaves you with new insights and renewed energy to engage the fight against corruption. Looking ahead, our upcoming regional webinars will focus on corruption issues in Europe, Latin America, and Africa. These sessions will be held in the fall and winter, and I will be sharing more information via email. So please stay tuned. If you'd like to stay connected, learn more about Youth Leaders Network, or become a member of Youth Leaders Network or APDI, please reach out after the event or follow us on social media to stay updated. I really hope that we will continue our push for integrity, accountability, and justice across borders and generations. And now over to you, Sean, to close out today's webinar.
So thank you, Marjeela. I want to thank you again, Dr. Syarif, for sharing such powerful insights, experiences, and unwavering commitment to justice. Your journey from Southeast Asia to leading Indonesia's anti-corruption efforts remind us the fight against corruption is not only legal, but also a political challenge that's deeply rooted in each government. From all of us here as students across the world passionate about governance, transparency, and justice, your words are call to action. Whether it's through law, policy, community leadership, or even technology, as you mentioned, each of us has a role to play in building institutions that are fair, accountable, and resilient. On behalf of everyone here, thank you again for Marjeela for hosting such a great event with Dr. Syarif, your honesty and your leadership. And to our audience, let this conversation not be the end, but the beginning of the engagement in the work of integrity. Together, we can build a systems that serve the people, not just the powerful. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing this global conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.